Hello, this is Greta, the founder and CEO of The Stories We Need to Hear. And today I'm going to be having a conversation with Sophie Beren, who is the founder and CEO of The Conversationalist and the creator of the app called Geneva. Sophie has created this incredible platform, The Conversationalist, where voices can be heard through open conversations that matter. And today I will be chatting with her about the mission behind her movement and how we can help destigmatize mental health and remove, the shame and this whole idea of a cancel culture. And finally, what she believes the meaning of normal is. So, hello, Sophie. How are you doing today?
Greta, thank you so much for having me. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm great. Happy Tuesday. Um, so, my first kind of question for you to begin our conversation is, can you begin by speaking about your mission and the inspiration behind creating The Conversationalist?
Of course, and thank you so much for your beautiful intro. I just want to throw it out there that I cannot take the credit for being the creator of the Geneva app.
Okay.
We love our friends at Geneva. We host our community on their platform, and so we're grateful to be building alongside them. But a little bit about us, we are the go-to destination for Gen Z. I myself am a unifier. I feel like I was put on this earth to bring people together, bridge the divides, and bring us closer together as a generation and a world. And so we do this every day through our platform and our Gen Z community. We're trying to help young people come together and have conversations that matter about any topic under the sun that matters most to them and to their entire generation. So it's a long story about how we got to where we are today, but grateful to be in this world of social impact and just empowering young people to use their voices for good.
Of course. Yeah. And I think that kind of leads me into, beginning our conversation. So we hear, this whole idea of the word normal, especially when we're talking about mental health. And unfortunately, mental health is, a topic that is extremely stigmatized and unfortunately shamed in our society, as you're familiar with as well. I kind of wanted to just kind of have a conversation to start off with about what you think really the word normal means. Is there a normal? For example, when we hear people say, oh, they don't have a mental health issue, they're a normal person. What does that kind of mean to you?
That is such a complex question, and I am not an expert by any means. But when I hear normal, the synonym for me is conformity. I think we have gotten comfortable with a lot of ideas as a society, and especially as young people, that we're taught from such an early age that leads us to believe that we as human beings need to look a certain way and act a certain way in order to be accepted. And so I find issue with the word normal. What even is normal? But I think you hit the nail on the head, Greta, in that mental health right now is such a stigmatized topic. And I think it's unfair to ascribe the word normal to people who are not struggling with their mental health. A huge insight that helped me with my own mental health journey was learning that every single person has mental health. I grew up thinking that the term mental health was a negative term and that it meant you were struggling or had a mental illness. But every single person has mental health. It depends on how you take care of your mental health. You could have great mental health. You could feel great about yourself. You're taking care of yourself. You could have bad mental health. You're struggling. You could be suffering from mental illness. And so I think it's important to recognize that at the end of the day, as human beings, we all, to some degree, struggle with our own mental health at times, but we all have mental health. And that's kind of helped me break down the stigma around the topic because it's so universal.
Right. And the stigma, it's that's sort of the mission of The Stories We Need to Hear, is to remove the stigma, or to at least try to help people understand and normalize mental health topics, because I agree with you. Normal, I don't believe in the word normal. And I think that having these open conversations about, hard to hear topics, which really shouldn't be these topics that we shy away from. They should be topics that we accept and, welcome with open arms. So a little bit more about, this whole shame and stigma surrounding mental health. What do you think we can do as a society, within our communities, even within small friend groups? or as an individual to help remove that shame or stigma that surrounds mental health?
There are so many things that we could do, and I believe it starts on such a granular level. For me, when I think about removing that stigma and shame, it all starts with a conversation. And Greta, this is what I love so much about the stories we need to hear, because I feel like our missions are so synergistic in that we believe in having these conversations and not shying away from topics that are difficult to talk about. And oftentimes, when we say, we need to have a conversation, let's sit down and talk about it, that can feel so intimidating. But if we strip that back to the essence of just reaching out to someone in your life, maybe someone you're friends with, a family member, a loved one, a classmate, and ask how they're doing beyond the surface and initiate a conversation in that lens of asking how someone is really doing, I think that's where we can start elevating empathy, which can further break down the stigma. In my mind, if we can better put ourselves in other people's shoes and understand that other people have lived experiences outside of our own, then we can actually break that stigma down, which can lessen shame and empower people to speak up and share their voice about topics that matter to them, in this scenario, mental health. I I unfortunately have far too often experienced losing friends to suicide and having friends who have struggled with mental health issues and never talked about it. And for me, I always used to beat myself up about not initiating those conversations before anything was even wrong, just to ask how someone is doing beyond the surface, because you never know what someone is going through behind the scenes, right? I struggle with this personally, putting out, the most picture perfect version of myself online on my social media platforms, and I have bad days, but I'm not showing that publicly. And I
Yeah,
think there's so much we could do in the small moments by just reaching out to someone who you haven't heard from in a while, or just checking in on your friends and showing up for them.
right.
And those conversations can have such a ginormous impact.
Oh yeah. And you made such a good point that this whole idea of like a highlight reel, which is essentially what Instagram is. You know, I've had, I struggled. My huge mission behind the stories we need to hear actually came from my own struggles and issues opening up to people. When I was struggling with suicide ideation and that sort of stuff. And it's so interesting how a simple text can completely change your day. A simple, I've received like a funny little meme or emoji from someone, and it seriously has made me feel really safe and really happy, and helped, whatever I'm struggling with that day, at least feel a little better. And we really don't know what's going on in everyone's mind and mental or physical health. And that's why I think being able to have these conversations and to allow people to feel more comfortable having these conversations, really, really can go such a long way for the way that our society views these issues, which are so vital and so important, especially in the past year. And my hope is that within the upcoming years, I mean, the stigma can at least be, removed in the slightest bit, because it's become very debilitating, I think. What are your thoughts?
I completely agree. And Greta, first of all, thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing a bit about your journey. I can't imagine what you must have gone through in those lowest of lows. And I'm sitting here feeling so inspired by the ability to take those moments and channel it into something as positive as the stories we need to hear. So thank you for sharing. I would actually be curious to know, in those moments, how were you able to initiate conversations? Or maybe if you weren't able to, what do you know now that you wish you had known then? Because I think those moments help break down the stigma.
Yeah. Well, I will admit that at first, and this completely, I can say, was due to the environment that I was in and the people that I was around. All people who seemingly were, normal, as society likes to label anyone, really without a mental health issue. And I felt as if I was internally struggling a lot more than the people around me, and I didn't feel comfortable, opening up to even a close friend and being like, look, for some reason that I'm not aware of, because a lot of the time it's like, why am I feeling this way? Like, I'm a happy person. Like, look at my life. Like, I have good friends. I have good family. Why do I feel this way? And we can't explain that. Some people are born with are born with mental health issues. Some people develop them through PTSD or different experiences. And for me, I didn't know how to explain it to myself or other people. So I kept this all bottled up, and it was due to the fear of being labeled as, crazy or unstable or, a freak to society, all of these awful words that go hand in hand, unfortunately, with an issue like suicide, and depression and anxiety. So for me, it took me a very long time to finally feel comfortable, speaking out on my journey. I've been through therapy, which is something that we really, really try to encourage on the Stories We Need to Hear. This idea that getting help is okay. Like, we should be able to ask for help, and it should be, able. We should be able to not be shamed for asking for help, or looked down upon. So I guess, really doing a lot of inner reflection. I was able to sort of think to myself, this is such a debilitating issue that I would like to help other people recognize that it's okay, that there are other people out there that are struggling with these same issues, and if we can feel comfortable sharing these conversations with each other, it can make a world of difference for another person maybe struggling. And that's why the Stories We Need to Hear, you can look at these individual submissions and see, this person also struggled with anxiety. Okay, I'm not alone. And it's this whole idea of not feeling so alone and isolated.
I resonate so much with what you're sharing. I think you communicated it so clearly and eloquently, and that it starts with us,
Mhm.
right? That inner dialogue, the conversations with yourself, that self reflection, and then bringing it to those around us and helping people realize that they aren't alone. And
Right.
it's interesting, it's a funny paradigm or a paradox right now that we're
Yeah.
saying we really don't like the word normal. However, the key to breaking down the stigma in my mind is normalizing
Yeah.
these conversations. And like you said, Greta, normalizing the fact that everyone should have access to self care and therapy is cool and is a good
Right.
thing. And normalizing a lot of these tropes that maybe we grew up with that aren't things we ever talked about before. If we can further normalize them, that's when we'll actually see that stigma start to break.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I completely agree. And I think that what you're doing, Sophie, with the Conversationalist, is it's really incredible. As a newer platform, the Stories We Need to Hear, I look up to the Conversationalist and your mission and what you've built. Um, it's so cool how, when I sort of started entering this whole world of wanting to help people and wanting to take away that stigma, I started finding accounts like the Conversationalists, and I started thinking to myself, wow, so people have been working on this for so much longer than I have. Why didn't I see these before? What accounts have I been following rather than these uplifting, incredible platforms that are really, really bringing so much change. And I just feel like the Conversationalist is such a wonderful platform because it makes you feel so welcome. You go to it, and I wanted to continue reading and listening to your interviews, and what you're doing is completely amazing. So I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the idea of cancel culture with you.
Let's do it.
What are your thoughts?
Oh man. Well, Greta, first of all, thank you so much for those kind words. It means more than you know. I am still so new to all of this. We've only been around for less than 2 years. So I felt so similarly and wishing I had started this sooner and I had known about these issues sooner. But we have society to blame, right? Like we all have that moment of realization at one point or another in our lives that leads us down this path. And just know you're not alone. And I'm so grateful to have connected with you and excited to watch your journey. Um,
Yeah.
but pivoting to cancel culture, and we could have a whole conversation about this. And you should see our sweatshirts that we just launched. They say
Oh,
cancel cancel culture.
You know what? I'll be purchasing one of those.
It's so cute. It's tie-dye. And I think that statement perfectly encapsulates how I personally feel about the subject. I have gone in depth about this and reflected, and my stance on cancel culture is primarily due to the fact that when we call for cancellation, whether it's a friend, someone we know in our circles, or a high profile person or celebrity, when we decide to cancel, that leaves no space for dialogue. And as someone who so wholeheartedly really champions the idea of conversations as a path to learning and growing and listening, it's really hard for me to wrap my mind around a concept that doesn't allow for that dialogue to happen. You know, we can talk about call out culture or calling people in to hold them accountable, but when we simply cancel and remove someone from society, remove them from their jobs, you know, completely exile them from their circles, that in my mind is a band-aid. It's not really solving the problem. It's just removing them from your purview. And so that's where I stand on cancel culture. And I think there is a time and a place. If someone did something horribly wrong, like the names who come to mind in the Me Too movement, for example, they are being canceled, right? They're going to jail.
Yeah,
They're being completely removed from society. And that should 100% be rectified and dealt with.
yeah,
But when it comes to someone saying something out of turn or not having the right access to the right education or information to know what to say, I think we owe it to human beings to have faith in our humanity to at least have a conversation. And
yeah.
so that's a little bit about where I stand, but Greta, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I mean, I agree completely with what you're saying. It's so interesting because, yeah, it's like these hard to hear conversations are truly what we need to be having. Something that comes to mind is how casually the word, you're canceled, or, they're canceled is used. This whole, and that kind of brings me into my next and last little topic that I wanted to talk to you about. And that is that, it's very interesting how we can be having a conversation about suicide, for example, and that mental health issue. And it's a very serious topic that, you know, hands down, everyone should be taking seriously. It's a little redundant, but everyone should be taking it very seriously. I think that we both can agree on that. But it's so interesting. Something that I've noticed in the recent years that I've noticed within maybe the past 5 years, this whole sort of culture, I don't know if maybe that's not the right term to use, but of using mental health issues, speaking about them in a very casual and insensitive way. What comes to mind is, I want to kill myself, casually used to refer to, who knows, like, God, I have this test, I want to kill myself. And it can be very triggering for people who are experiencing or have experienced that issue, but the words are used so casual. Another word that unfortunately comes to mind for me is the word rape, and how that word has been casualized so much. I hate to say this, and of course, trigger warning. But an example of this is, oh my gosh, that test, that math test, raped me. And I want to know your thoughts on how we can help people. And this has to do with having these open conversations and these serious conversations, how we can help people be more sensitive to these topics, to suicide, or something as horrific as rape, or depression, using that word so casually when you never really know how serious that word might be and the meaning behind it might be to someone who has gone through it, or is going through it, or even knows a person in their life going through it. So I want to know your thoughts, Sophie.
This brings me back to my high school days because as you're sharing those phrases, Greta, I have to admit that those are things that kids in my high school said. You
Yeah,
know, we didn't know better. And I
right.
think because of that, it's because we didn't have people who had gone through these issues at that age to know how to be sensitive to them. I and again, not to bring us to a dark place again, but I, for the first time, understood what it meant to struggle with mental health when one of my friends died by suicide my senior year of high school. Thank you. I haven't talked about this in a long time, so it's interesting to reflect on, but those are phrases that we used all the time. This notion of, I need to go kill myself, or, this test, raped me. Those are phrases that we use because we didn't know better. And so I think the more that we can, again, elevate empathy and recognize that vulnerability can be a strength, I think the more people can recognize that these phrases have ramifications beyond this colloquial way that we present them at a young age. And what I mean by that is, the reason why I never really understood mental health struggles growing up was because I was lucky and I didn't experience them. I didn't have anyone in my life who was going through depression or anxiety, or if they were, they weren't talking about it. And so I'm such a believer that if we can encourage one another and uplift one another to be more vulnerable about our struggles and what we're going through, the the more we're able to put ourselves in that person's shoes, open ourselves up to another person's experience, and understand how a lot of these phrases and even the simple language and the words that we use can be so hurtful. And I think I have a senseless optimism about me and having faith in our humanity that we all want to learn and grow and educate ourselves. And for some, that might not be true, but most times we'll be so pleasantly surprised that someone will open themselves up to a new perspective and understand through someone else's experience. And so that's my take on it, in hopefully finding a really easy way to start understanding what other people are going through. And I think this could relate to any topic, not just mental health, but oftentimes the issues that we advocate for and the topics that matter most to us matter because we have a personal tie or a connection to the topic. And how awesome would it be if more people could start being invested in these causes and caring, if they can understand why these topics are so closely tied to you or to a loved one? And I believe vulnerability is the path to get there.
I love that. I love that. And I could not agree more with, what you've just said. I think that everyone needs to hear that.
Thanks. And it's easier said than done, right? Like,
Yeah.
I can't imagine, I'm thinking back to those days in high school, wanting to open up and share those parts about myself with others. It's very difficult. And so I think if it can just start somewhere with
Yeah.
someone you trust, a friend, a loved one, and just sharing a little bit about what you may be going through or asking someone else what they might be going through, that
Good,
curiosity,
yeah.
yeah, that
As
curiosity
you said
can lead to
earlier,
something beautiful.
Yeah, yeah. The curiosity is extremely beautiful. And it reminded me of something you said earlier. Just asking someone like how they are. How are you today? How are you doing? Just checking in on someone. So often, I feel like we forget to send a text as simple as "How are you?" to a friend or a family member. We're so concerned about what we're eating for lunch or what we're doing later, in the day, what our weekend plans are. I guess that doesn't really, right now, no one really has weekend plans, but that sort of thing. And I think that we've kind of forgot the whole meaning of really checking in on one another and asking, how are you? Because we both know it feels so good to receive a text like that or a phone call or even just seeing someone in person.
Couldn't
So
agree more.
yeah. Well, Sophie, I really, really enjoyed having this conversation with you. I encourage everyone who is listening and has listened to this interview with Sophie to check out her page, The Conversationalist. It is an incredibly inspiring and uplifting platform. And there are more conversations by Sophie herself on that page. So yes, everyone check it out and have an amazing rest of your week.
Greta, thank you so much.